today's presentation. Training will be on linear construction as well as conceptual site model. Both these committees have worked really hard to put this together, so we certainly appreciate their hard work, and hopefully that will come through in today's presentation. Just a couple quick housekeeping notes. Please, if you don't mind, check your cell phones, make sure they're either on mute or turned off. Just very distracting to both the audience and the presenters when they do go off, so ask your cooperation with that. I'd also like to welcome, we have a webinar that is being broadcast today, so welcome to the webinar participants. We appreciate your tying into this class, and we certainly appreciate everyone who is here in the room. Just for when we do have breaks, the location of the restrooms, they're out the door and to the left, as well as also a set when you go out the door to the right. When you cross past the guard shack on your way to the cafeteria, there's also restrooms on your left. The cafeteria is through the double doors and to the left and all the way down the end of the hallway. When we do have breaks, you're welcome to go down there and have coffee. In addition to that, I just want to also explain to you how questions will be handled in this training seminar. Oftentimes we do have more questions than we do have times to answer. If that's the case, we do commit to answering those questions. For the people who are in the audience, we'll either encourage you to either write down those questions and give them to us, or contact us via email, and we'll make sure that those questions are answered by the appropriate presenters. In addition, for people on the webinar, you have the capability to submit questions. If we don't get to those questions, we will make sure that we do have them recorded, and we'll make sure that the presenters answer them, providing you give us your email address. They will get back to you with those answers. So that's about it. For this morning, I would like to introduce Dan Toder. Dan has been gracious enough to always come to these training seminars and give us a brief update on the LSRPA, as well as give us his perspective on the training. So Dan, I'd like to introduce. Thank you.
I don't get applause that much, so I appreciate it. Good morning, everybody. Good morning to everybody on the webinar. I'm glad we have that capability so that you can participate from your office desk. I have some news to tell you today, but first I'd like to thank our sponsors. I'm Dan Toder. I represent the LSRPA, and my mission for the association is to bring together the DEP and the LSRPA to put on training sessions like these. And I think the program's been very successful in getting the word out. Next slide, Joe. But I do want to thank our sponsors. Every time you come to one of these, we have refreshments in the back, and they have to be paid for, and our sponsors do pay for those, so I'd like to thank them. We have a new one on the list, Alpha Labs. Thanks for their support, and all the others are continuing to support us, and together, along with their support and the membership dues, we continue to survive. Next slide. So what do we have ahead of us? The LSRPs, at least, have a big obstacle in the way. Everybody knows this slide by now. I show it at every session. But now there's a big change to it, and the biggest mountain on the picture there is the LSRP exam. And the LSRPA is preparing now to help the LSRPs pass that exam by developing a exam review course for the LSRPs. We hope to have that in April. Next slide. So what are we doing? The exam is scheduled in May, or that's tentative. We're not sure. We don't have dates yet. Maybe May, maybe June now, but we'll see. Of course, we're going to have that exam review course come in April. That's what we're planning. And in addition, we're planning an ethics course. The LSRPs need to take an ethics course as part of their continuing ed requirements for their license renewals. The board has the LSRP board, the state board, has approved the ethics course for 7 credit hours for LSRPs. So LSRPs are allowed to start accumulating credits now towards their first license renewal, which is several years down the road, but at least you can start getting credits for the courses that are available. And the board has an approval process now where they approve credits. They have to approve each and every course that's put in front of them. And each course is going to have a certain amount of credits approved. The ethics course will have 7 CECs associated with it. There's also the sea soil modeling course that's approved now, and that's going to be a 14 credit course because it's a two-day course. If you haven't been on the state board website yet, that's the web address right there. You can look up what's going on with the state board. They have meetings every other Monday night, pretty much on a fairly regular basis. Sometimes that changes. So if you want to come down and listen to what the board says, it's usually in this room every other Monday afternoon at about 4 o'clock. The board meetings start. And the board has to do several things. It's got to write regulations for LSRPs. The regulations will define the disciplinary process, the complaint process, the audit process for LSRPs, and continuing ed requirements, which we now know is 36 CECs for every 3 years of license renewal period. Next one. Why join? Saving money. That's the number one feature of the LSRP. Every course that we put on that has a fee associated with it is going to be discounted to members. And the member discounts and the courses you need to take for your LSRP license will definitely pay for your membership dues. And as we put these courses on, remember I said the sponsors provide support, our membership dues support us, and with revenues from these courses, we'll take in more money, and then maybe that will force the membership fee to be even less than it is now, which it's $150 a year. Next one. How do you register? Very easy. You can see me today, or you can sign up online. We make it very easy, and again, it's an annual membership fee of $150. So thanks for your attention this morning, and I think you're going to have a very informative session on conceptual site models and also linear construction. George?
Thank you very much, Dan. Again, I actually forgot to introduce myself in the very beginning. My name is George Nicholas. I'm a geologist with the Bureau of Groundwater Pollution Assessment. I'm also the chairperson for the oversight of the Technical Guidance Program. In that respect, my job really is to make sure that there is progress and try to coordinate the work of all the technical guidance committees. So right now, as part of that, I'd like to just give you a brief update on really what the guidance committees are doing, how they were made, a little bit about the document review process, the training, talk a little bit about variance from rule and the application of guidance. I think that's an important issue, as well as talking about a little bit about our vision for updating the technical guidance. Over the past years, we've really been laying the foundation for the LSRP program. The tech regs and ARCs, they've been revised to better reflect how we're going to be doing business under the LSRP program. In close coordination with that effort, we really worked hard to develop technical guidance, and the technical guidance is intended to be a resource to LSRPs as they work on cleaning up sites. We hope that this foundation will serve to strengthen a lot of the work that we do into the future. So let's talk a little bit about the technical guidance committees. What are those committees composed of? Well, they're composed of 2 to 3 DEP staff and 3 to 7 stakeholders, and that really is dependent upon the topic and how complex that topic is. That really drives the size of the committee and what they need to get done. The members were selected on those committees to represent a balance of technical expertise, regulatory knowledge, and also practical application. And I think that really has come through in the work of the committees. The committees are chaired by a DEP representative. In addition to that, there's a representative from the oversight group, which is my group, that just works with them to ensure that there's progress. They also answer any questions and just make sure that those committees can continue to do their work. So what are the tasks of those committees? Well, clearly, they're really tasked to develop technical guidance. They move the how-to or the prescriptive aspects of the technical regulations into guidance, technical guidance, and we asked them the chairpersons from each one of those committees to coordinate with the committee that is writing the technical regulations. The issue there is really to hope that there is coordination between those two and ensure consistency between what's coming out of the tech regs and what's going into technical guidance. And lastly, they're really tasked also with working with the training program. Training program is led by Karen Riccardi, who's in the back. Wave there, Karen. Previously led by Tessie Fields. The training program has really worked hard to put these training programs which is the reason we're here today. And the technical guidance committees also work closely with the training program in developing these kinds of presentations. So for stakeholder input on the committees, what does that really mean? Well, while Sarah required the department to follow the stakeholder process, clearly it's become a lot more than that, more than just a mere requirement. For technical guidance committees, it's become a great opportunity for collaboration, exchanging of ideas, and consensus building. Consensus, just want to point out, consensus doesn't mean always getting your way. It means looking at all the perspectives and viewpoints that are brought to the table and finding the best solution. You might not always be happy with the answer, but you can live with it, and that's really what all the committees have been working towards. The technical guidance documents, they represent a great deal of thought and effort. It's a good balance of regulatory perspective, cutting-edge science, and also practical applications that the committees really work through in developing their guidance. And I think it's really made the guidance much better than if the DEP worked on those documents alone. In addition to that, the working relationships have been excellent on the committees. Between the regulators and the regulated community, I think egos, for the most part, were left at the door. And the committees really worked to look at the scientific basis for a lot of the things that they were doing. They tried to understand each other's viewpoints, and when they did that, they really did build trust. And I think that is reflected in the document and how those documents were issued final and the content. I think it really helped us make better decisions in the process. Let's talk a little bit about the review process. The review process, I think, gave us a much broader input from the regulated community as well as within internal DEP. I think that also helped us increase the content of the document and make them much better. And the training, I think, really is also an excellent venue for information exchange. It allows us not only to get our message out and the information out, but also it's a good venue to receive feedback from the audience as well. So let's talk a little bit more about the review process, just so you understand what was involved when the documents were issued. In the very beginning, we realized that a technical review process was really critical, but we really needed to balance the need for feedback with the potential for crippling the process if we received too many comments. If that was the case, we may never get those documents issued. An example of that might be the vapor intrusion document, which received over 800 comments. They really worked through those comments, and it took them a long time to issue that document. If we opened up to broad comment to everyone, I think the volume of comments that came back and the level of effort required to address all those comments and issue a response document may have led to or many documents never being issued, and that really wasn't our intent. The solution we came up with is a 6-week review time frame. It consisted of internally review by site remediation management and interested site remediation staff. For stakeholders, the documents were distributed to every stakeholder in all of the technical guidance committees. The idea there is we asked those stakeholders to coordinate a review within their respective constituencies and then to get all those comments, funnel them back to the committee chairs, and that seemed to work very well. In addition to that, we asked for a broad level review from the SRP steering committee. Their intent was to identify any deal breakers that would potentially leave the document unusable by the regulated community. For the most part, this has worked very well, and we've gotten excellent feedback. I just want to point out that the documents, when the document is posted final, it is posted on the DEP website, the SRP website under the guidance library. In addition to just the document being posted, we also post a response to comments document, which I think is very effective. We did that for 2 reasons. Number one, to let you know that we actually received your comment, and we certainly appreciate that kind of feedback, you taking the effort to give us that feedback, but also to give you an idea of why a comment was or was not incorporated into the document. This is a list of the technical guidance documents that are completed final or in the process of achieving that goal. Again, the documents, when they're final, are posted on the DEP webpage. Some of the documents that were just issued final, the soil preliminary assessment document, as well as the linear construction and conceptual site model were just issued. Good thing linear construction was issued. They worked hard and got that done prior to this training seminar. Next, Joe. This is a list of the upcoming training sessions, including today's session. For some topics, such as the analytical, which is QA/QC, and the attainment, they're kind of complicated topics. They've taken a little while to develop those documents, so we have a TBD, to be determined. And once we get that information, a better idea of when we can issue those training sessions, we will update this. Next slide, please, Joe. So let's talk a little bit about rule, variance, and technical guidance. When draft technical guidance documents were originally issued draft, we had a link within those documents, and that link directed you to an SRP webpage, training webpage, and it kind of described the procedure for obtaining a variance. The biggest problem with that is that under the current tech regs, variance from rule as well as guidance were treated the same, and that really wasn't the intent of SARA or ARCS. And so what we really needed to do was to define how the department intends to address this issue between now and the adoption of the proposed tech regs. This document was written to be very brief, and it really describes the process for applying for a variance from rule as well as applying guidance. So let's look at currently what we have as far as the variance from regulation. The current procedure for obtaining a variance is in Section 1.7 of the tech regs. Just very briefly, it requires you to provide a rule citation, a description of the requested variance, and documentation that it provides verifiable results, still meets the objectives of the rule, and also moves the remedial phase forward. This, just to be clear, this was intended to be submitted in the next submittal for the site. So that one of the problems with this was if the department had a problem with the variance, and we asked you to go back and do the work, a lot of time and effort was wasted. So Joe, next slide, please. What the proposed rule, hopefully when it comes out in May, what that will intended to do is it's slightly different. It's similar in regard to the information that needs to be submitted, such as the rule citation, description of the variance, documentation of results, meeting rule objectives, and moving the remedial phase forward. However, that needs to be submitted before the variance work is initiated. In addition to that, you need to submit a variance form. And the idea behind this is not intended to delay the work at all, but it gives the department a chance, an opportunity to look at that variance. The work can proceed, but the department has the opportunity to look at the variance, to evaluate it. If there's any problems, to contact you before the work is done to resolve the issue. In addition to that, the department will have the ability to observe the work. Next slide, Joe. So as far as the application of guidance, LSRPs have the flexibility to use a professional judgment. I think that has been one of the intents of the guidance, one of the questions a lot of people have had. As far as regulation, they're allowed to use other guidance if there's no existing DEP guidance on a particular topic, or if the DEP guidance isn't considered appropriate or necessary. But it's necessary to explain what was done and why. And I think that's not just important to the DEP, although it is. Many instances, the DEP, if they have questions, they can't issue an RAO, or they'll delay the process. But in addition to that, I think it's very important for other LSRPs, especially those who are picking up cases where work was previously done. I think it's critical for them to know what was done at the site and how it impacts the work they're about to undertake. Clearly, the complexity of any explanation is going to be relative to the complexity of the site conditions. Just as far as updating technical guidance, we envision technical guidance to be updated in response to changes in regulations, and that will be coming up, and also advances in technology. Clearly, we want to make sure that our guidance is current. That's something that's not easy to do, but we are committed to undertaking that. For major changes, we would want to reconvene the committee, understanding that it may not be the same committee chairperson, it may not be the same committee members, but it's important for us to get a group of people together, stakeholders as well as DEP staff, to evaluate major changes, major impacts to particular guidance. For minor changes, we envision just the chairperson to take a look at those minor changes, and they may just result in notations being added to the SRP webpage where the document is located, identifying that the department is aware of certain issues and how we're going to handle them. So as far as feedback, I'm sorry? We had a question, who's going to define major versus minor? I don't think that is going to be clearly definable at all, but it's going to be the first step. Of course, we would probably approach the chairperson, someone who's familiar with the topic, and at that point, the chairperson would advise me whether we really need to get the committee back together or that's something that can be handled easily. You're welcome. As far as feedback, going through this whole process, it's really critical that we do obtain feedback. That really is going to help us improve what we do. We want to know about document usability. Are there any problems encountered with that document that we can fix? Again, that's a good idea to issue a frequently asked questions document, perhaps. But I think it's our policy that if we have too many frequently asked questions, perhaps we need to update the document. And we would much rather do that than have pages and pages of frequently asked questions because that's an indication there's a problem with the document. In addition to that, we would certainly like to hear of suggested updates from the regulated community as well as SRP staff. That provides us an idea that perhaps we need to look at that document again and go through the process of perhaps revising it. Or we'd also like ideas for new guidance. If practitioners are out in the field and realize that there is something that is unclear or that we need additional direction on, if they advise the department of that, we would certainly take that into consideration and potentially create new guidance committees. The feedback link is on the DEP-SRP website. The feedback link is provided there. That's an existing link. It's already up and running. Just make sure that you would clearly identify what the issue is so that we can direct that to be answered by the appropriate person. Okay, that's it. I will be glad to entertain any quick questions if you have them. Otherwise, we'll move on. So, are there any questions about the guidance process? Excellent. That means you're all asleep or I've done a fantastic job. I'm hoping it's the second part. We do have a question. Dan?
On the variance form. That variance form goes in. How do we get any kind of indication as to if or when that variance has been accepted? And also, I know that when I propose a variance,
Just test.
I want to. When I want to propose a variance, I always get a little paranoid and I ask for a technical consultation to make sure it will be okay, and then it's memorialized in an email back to whoever I talk to. But this variance form could save time and take down the number of technical consultations that you schedule. So I was just wondering, that could be a very helpful form to help the LSRPs get their variances, to have some confidence that the variance will be acceptable.
So that's a positive comment, Dan. I like that.
That is a positive. It's meant to be a positive comment.
Please take note, Dan had a positive comment. I would encourage you all to have positive comments today. Barry, did you want to comment on that at all, as far as the variance process? And hold on just for a second.
I think it needs to be.
Just want to introduce Barry Fresco. Go ahead, Barry.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make it clear that the process is not to be construed that you submit a form and you wait for the department's response. This is as any form, any report that is submitted, you're submitting it, but you're moving forward. But it does give an opportunity for the department to give it a quick review just to see if there is anything that may, require the department of calling the LSRP or asking a couple of questions. So, but that's how we envision it. If it is something fairly significant, as Dan mentioned, there is that opportunity of setting up a technical consultation, running something by the department.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Fresco. Any other questions? We got one back here.
How long? Once the form is submitted, how long are you waiting? Once the form has been submitted, how long are you waiting?
As Barry said, we are not waiting at all. The work can proceed. The idea is it gives the department just a brief opportunity to look at that. The work can proceed. But again, if there's any major issues, we will contact you to try to resolve them so that you don't continue the work and perhaps do something that needs to be redone. Another question?
Is there a time frame for submittal of the form? You indicated the department may want to go out and observe the work, but what happens if the form is submitted the day before the work?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know if that happens often. Barry, do you have an answer for that one?
Now you are putting me on the spot. We did have in the rule proposal the concept of submitting the variance request at some period of time prior to
the work.
Prior to work. I just don't remember off the top of my head if we had a specified time like 30 days or something, but I just don't remember.
Okay. The question is, if there is a delay in between the time that form is submitted and the work is done, it'll be minor, and it will not be contingent upon the department issuing an approval. It would be just a clock ticking, and then the work can proceed. Okay, I think we're going to get rolling. Again, if you do have questions, please write them down. We'll be glad to get you answers on them. But to move along with the process, the first committee up would be linear construction. I'd like to introduce Tessie Fields. A round warm applause for Tessie to welcome her.
That's great. Can you guys come every morning and give that to me as I come into the office? Applause, that would be great. As George said, I was the chairperson of the training committee, and we did a lot of work, and Karen is continuing that. I'm still going to be involved in training, but I'm also going to be working with Ken Clue as his executive assistant going forward. So my role is going to be changing a little bit. I want to, Joe, when I need a new slide, I'll say new slide. I'm afraid, I tend to go ahead, and I don't want you to go ahead with me here. George said that the documents are posted, and I can say the linear construction guidance was posted on Friday. That should be another round of applause, because it was 2 years in the making, which is unbelievable. We are also going to have at 1 o'clock this afternoon additional question and answer opportunity for anybody who would like to participate on linear construction. It's going to be at 501. It's the building across the street towards the parking garage. It's the building on the left on the second floor. So at 1 o'clock, we'll be there, and Jeff and I will be there, and probably I see other people from our committee might want to come. Our chairperson of the committee is Kirsten Poynton-Hahn. She has been out sick, and she's sick again today, and we want to say hello to Kirsten. She's going to try to participate with us via conference call at 1 o'clock. So the first thing I want to say about linear construction is that this is kind of a subset of cases. Not everybody's involved in these. It's its own little world. So keep that in mind as we go on. Next. This is our committee. It looks like a big committee, but there was also another committee behind this, which was its own steering committee. There were a lot of stakeholders from public and private sectors involved in this. So the other thing I wanted to say is that participating today will be Jeff Forrest. I'll introduce him a little bit later. Okay, let's see. So next slide. I want to take a few moments to talk about what linear construction projects are and what kind of situations they commonly run into. Before I get to this definition that's in the rules, I want to describe linear construction projects. These projects, let me see, are long. Often they're very long, between 2 points. They can be miles long, they can be a mile long, they can be 500 feet long, they can be 50 miles long. They can take years to complete. they often intersect contamination one way or another, and that's what this guidance is all about. If there's no contamination, if they're doing their construction, they don't run into contamination, they are not in. Okay, they are off doing construction. Happens all around the state all the time. Not every one of those projects has to come in. It's only when they intersect contamination. And so this guidance focuses on how they should deal with contamination that they encounter. So there's a couple aspects of this definition that are critical. One is that linear construction project is a project that's conducted by a non-responsible party. That's critical. And it says to create, maintain, or alter a roadway, railroad, or a utility. So these are pipelines, these are cable lines, these are DOT roads, county roads, all kinds of things like that. So it would be any of those projects that encounter at least one contaminated property and that will generate at least 200 cubic yards of contaminated soil that's going to be dug up, and the people on the webinar cannot see that I'm making a digging motion here, but at least 200 cubic yards that will be dug up. So those are linear construction projects. These will be, that'll be defined in the rules that are coming out in May. Next. So what if there's a linear construction project that does not generate 200 cubic yards of soil, contaminated soil? Well, these are numerous small projects go on all the time when you see guys in the middle of an intersection doing work on a utility line or something. They don't generate 200 cubic yards. This volume was sort of put in there to weed out those little short duration construction projects or maintenance projects. So people that generate, or projects that could generate less than 200 cubic yards, they're not considered a linear construction project. They don't have to give the department notice. They are not required to hire an LSRP. They're not required to submit a final report. Okay? However, we strongly recommend that they follow the concepts and other department guidance and rules about handling contaminated material. That's necessary to protect public health and the environment. Next. Now, here's a lovely graphic I put together all by myself. Who's laughing? You're laughing. Okay. So this kind of very simple graphic just shows the kind of projects you're going to run into. The blue line is a linear construction project that can be 50 feet wide. It can be 300 feet wide. It doesn't matter, but the concepts are the same. The red box shows a project that the responsible party, and when I say RP, have RP here, I mean responsible party, that the responsible party is doing the remediation of that red site that is intersecting the linear. I guess I could be using a doohickey. I'm not going to bother. All right, the yellow box is that one? The yellow box, for those of you who are colorblind, is an example of a site that the linear construction entity or that project is they've agreed to do the work, the remediation. It could be a gas station or something they run into that they've decided based on their design and based on their schedule that they want to do. Okay, so you get an idea of what those look like or what they involve. Okay, there we are. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on how we got here now. In the past, right now there are no rules specifically for linear construction projects. So in the past they came in as cases. They got assigned a case manager, filed the tech rules, and did all that, submitted reports and paid fees and such. When the LSRP program was under development, then Assistant Commissioner Kropp started to work with a group of stakeholders on the outside. How are these kinds of sites going to fit into the new paradigm? So we put together the stakeholder group, and we have been working with them ever since. We knew that the process for linear construction projects had to be rethought under the LSRP program. Next. Okay. So as a result of that, we worked with stakeholders, and we created a new process for these projects. The rules will be adopted in May of this year, and they have their own little subchapter. It's called subchapter 16 of the ARCS rules, and the guidance, which was put out Friday. It can be used now. You don't have to wait for the rules to go into effect to be able to use it now. Okay, and in the guidance, the focus of the guidance, there's a couple little process things in there, administrative things, but basically it urges linear construction projects to use best management practices for handling and dealing with contamination as they move along during their work. Next. Just to reiterate, who can use, and actually this could be a question, who can use linear construction guidance? And I'm waiting for everybody to yell back. Not responsible parties, not responsible parties. Though if you're not responsible for the contamination, you may use the guidance. Next slide. Who can't use the guidance? George? Responsible parties. If you're a responsible party, you can't use the guidance. For example, a linear construction project is ongoing, and the people working on that cause a discharge. They have a tanker, they have I don't know what kind of situation they can have, but they cause a discharge. If they cause a discharge, they're a responsible party, and that discharge would have to be cleaned up pursuant to ARCS and tech rules. Get it? Everybody got it? They're nodding their heads. Good. All right. Next. So some of the basic concepts behind the linear construction guidance. The basic tenet is that the person conducting the linear construction project is not required to remediate contamination for which they're not responsible, but they must allow the responsible party access to conduct the remediation or conduct it themselves. So that's a very simple, straightforward thing. They are not responsible for doing it themselves if they're not a responsible party, but they would have to let the responsible party have access. Often, who is going to conduct remediation at any particular site along a linear construction project is often figured out ahead of time. It's done generally by agreement between the linear construction entity and the property owners of the responsible parties during the planning of these projects. And a lot of those things are done contractually, figured out contractually, but they can be modified based on what the schedule is for the project or the construction design. Projects that run into a lot of contamination, they anticipate contamination in certain areas. Sometimes they redesign it to go around them. So there's a number of ways they can handle this. Next. The process for linear construction projects, there's a pre-sampling, pre-project sampling and planning part. The guidance only handles this a very small section that discusses this. It was decided that most entities that do linear construction projects already have a process for doing this kind of work. So we don't need to tell them how to do it. It's part of their business. They know what they're doing. However, let's see. Okay, part of this process, some do sampling, a lot of it always takes in like a PA kind of work. They look in paperwork to see if they can identify what might come across their path. They identify contaminated sites, areas of historic fill, and so some of the sampling that they may conduct as part of this pre-project planning, and I have to never do that alliteration again in a talk. So they can also determine what they can use as clean fill. If the sampling they do identifies clean areas, they can use that within their project corridor as clean fill. Okay, the next two items are going to be in the rule. We're going to be requiring linear construction projects to hire an LSRP and to submit a notification at the start of the project. They have their very own form. I'm sure you'll be happy to know. And they're just going to give us a summary of the project, the name and location, contact people, who the LSRP is, and they'll pay a relatively small fee. I'm confusing some people in the audience, but that's okay. He's usually confused. So they're going to tell us who you are, what you're doing, and who the name of your LSRP is. No separate form for that is required. Then we're asking that you follow the guidance, and the guidance sets out how to address commonly encountered situations. The LSRP on these cases will have to use professional judgment to a large degree in order to apply the guidance based on what kind of conditions they are seeing for that particular project in the field. Next. So the process, I mentioned they come in the beginning, that let us know they're there. We require them to handle contaminated soil consistent with our rules and guidance. We, in the guidance document, one of the basic tenets is if contamination is to remain behind, that it be capped to prevent exposure. And at the end of the project, a summary report should be submitted. We understand that these can be years apart, the notification at the beginning and the final report at the end. No NFA or RAO is required for linear construction projects. Makes sense. If the linear construction entity, that's the abbreviation there, wants an RAO for the site or part of the site, they would have to follow the ARCS rules and the TEC rules. So for that gas station or so, that yellow block that was up on the screen, let's say they wanted to take over the remediation, they want to get an RAO for that because, let's say, they want to sell a piece of it after they're done with their linear construction project, they have to follow the TEC rules and ARCS rules. Next. So the big ticket items, what's a little bit different in this guidance than all the rest of the DEP rules and guidance, is that the linear construction entity does not have to delineate contamination that they encounter outside their excavation area. They're allowed to just have their excavation area within their project and focus on what they run into. If they encounter gross contamination, they should remove that contamination. Soil that is contaminated but not grossly contaminated may be put back into the excavation, but keeping in mind the full remediation would either have to be done by themselves or the responsible party. If it's a kind of remediation where capping is a normal course of events, if it's historic fill and something can be capped anyway, they can put that kind of stuff back into the hole, and the roadway will constitute the cap, and then they're done. So, and once again, the soil reuse within the linear construction project has to be consistent with DEP guidance. Often they've told me that linear construction entities, when they're doing a project, particularly cable or gas or something like that, they conduct the remediation within their corridor because they don't want to give anyone access to that project. They don't want people digging within, 5 feet of their gas line or cable lines or whatever. So that's often their approach to that. But it's their choice, either do it or give the responsible party access. Next. When there is contamination left behind, a 6-inch cap of clean fill is suggested or recommended in the guidance. Often, like I said, roadways or other areas that are built in these, or they're contained easements and all that. 6 inches is a little smaller than it often is done on contaminated sites. Generally 2 feet is required, so this is a little less. These projects involve the movement of massive amounts of soil, and also the feeling was that these areas are somewhat contained anyway, just because they're roadways and things like that, that there's not going to be a lot of access to them. The linear construction entity is not responsible for establishing, maintaining engineering or institutional controls. The owner, property owner, and the responsible party would be responsible for doing that, and in the same way they wouldn't have to conduct public notification requirements that are in the tech rules at 1.4. That would be the responsibility of the responsible party. Next. So this lists the 3 guidance documents that we think will be used most frequently as part of these projects. We believe that it's important that a lot of planning and care is taken when these projects are being conducted so as not to move contaminated soil to clean areas and all that. So, and those are available on the website, of course. All right, next. All right, I am going to introduce Jeff Forrest, who's with Dresner Robin. He was, we're going to take questions at the end. And he has graciously agreed to participate in this training and has been a great help overall. And as soon as he's done, we'll take some questions from you at that time. Thanks.
Thanks, Tessie, and good morning, everybody, and good morning to everybody on the webinar. I am going to be using some graphics on the webinar. I'm going to ask Joe to follow me. I'm going to be using a laser pointer on some of the graphics to try and make it a little bit more real world for everybody. So when I come to do that, I'm going to ask Joe, for the sake of the people on the webinar, to be able to follow me with the mouse cursor. Thank you. What I'd like to do is build on some of the points that Tessie spoke about, try and make it a little bit more real world. Acronyms that we use so far: LCP for Linear Construction Project, LCE for Linear Construction Entity. But to just pick up on 2 points which I hope will make your understanding of the guidance document and how these projects are undertaken a little clearer. Please try and recall the concepts of non-responsible party for the linear construction entity versus a responsible party for contamination that may already exist or property owners that may already be impacting or have the potential to impact on the property. That distinction is very, very important, and it will help you as you undertake a project. Whoops. Wow, this is sensitive. Okay. Thanks to Lewis Berger, we have a graphic here. It just happens to be a roadway improvement project. Try and make it, try and give examples of particular scenarios that may occur on a project. I'd like to go through some of the features. It's a major roadway intersection. Thanks, Joe. It could have easily been a transmission line or a pipeline crossing it or a roadway over a railway line. Just use your imagination. In this particular instance, there was a major taking here at the corner. It was actually an acquisition. You could envision or imagine it could have been perhaps a gas station. Gas stations are often at corners or intersections. In this particular instance, the roadway authority decided that they, in the contract negotiations, would have the property owner maintain responsibility for cleanup. At this other parcel in green here, in this particular instance, the roadway authority decided that, again, part of their contract negotiations, they would assume responsibility for the cleanup of that particular parcel. So there's a couple of different scenarios. And for utility companies such as electricity or pipeline, often they are actually not taking ownership. They will have an easement over the property. So in that particular instance, they would not want to take responsibility for cleanup either. Again, using your imagination, assume that this particular bypass link here is excavated in cut, so it's going to generate excess soil for the project. On the, I'll call this the north-south alignment, given that we have a north arrow up here. On the north-south alignment, historic fill was encountered that exceeded soil cleanup criteria, so we do have historic fill along this part of the alignment here. And again, historic fill is addressed in the guidance, and it can be reused on a project. There are also a couple of other major structural features, a bridge over a roadway down here, another bridge over a creek here, and of course a major bridge improvement at the center of the intersection, all of which required increases in grade elevation in order to provide adequate clearances as part of the roadway project. So just keep that in mind as we move through the presentation. I'll come back to that, and we can apply some of the scenarios from the document. Tessie did touch on the fact that the document addresses, in a very general sense, planning and due diligence, and mentioned that a lot of the linear construction entities, just as part of their normal business practices, would engage in, obviously, assessing a particular alignment or features to be encountered in the alignment, as well as potential design. And normally that's a business decision, one that's used to assess risk, and also, importantly, to determine whether or not a linear construction entity may want to take ownership or not of a property and undertake cleanup. So this is where the lawyers get involved with regards to contract negotiations for purchasing or easement, and also for access agreements should they want access to particular properties. As many of you know, and many of you advise your clients, you don't need to use an LSRP for this part of the work. In fact, a lot of the clients prefer you don't use an LSRP in case you discover a discharge and then you have a mandatory reporting obligation. That's up to each particular business entity to decide what they want to do. But one of the purposes of undertaking due diligence, of course, is to try and identify your site, whether you have contaminated sites, whether you have historic fill. Another reason that's really important, because at that particular point you have an opportunity to test the 200 cubic yard trigger for whether or not you may generate greater than 200 cubic yards of contaminated soil. Another reason you may take use of that opportunity is because if you think you do and you're going to have to fill out the the LCP notification form, you do have to list potential and known contaminated sites on that form. So this is your first opportunity to address the 200 cubic yard trigger. It also gives you the opportunity, if you think you want to know more about the site or you want to understand more of the risks associated with the site, to devise or put together a pre-construction sampling plan. For instance, you may identify a site. It may have a history of underground storage tanks, or it may be an old chemical factory that you're acquiring. You may decide you want to do some more sampling. So it enables you to put together, enables the linear construction entity to put together a sampling plan if necessary. And again, as Tessie alluded to, the DEP is typically not involved in these stages of the project. It's done by the entity themselves as part of managing their risks. Okay, so the linear construction entity decides that they have identified some potentially contaminated sites. They need to know more about the properties, so they will undertake their own pre-construction sampling. Again, that gives you an opportunity to evaluate the data and determine whether or not you trigger the 200 cubic yard contaminated soil criteria. If it is discovered during the pre-construction sampling, I know many utilities, they would look at the information very, very closely, and if there was so much gross contamination there, they may either decide to redesign or even reroute the project. So it's very important at this stage as another decision point on how you would approach the project. If there's more than 200 yards of contaminated soil, then you're able to go ahead as per the guidance document. No hotline calls are required for known discharges. It's discharges that are known to the DEP program, sites that are already in the site remediation program, that are already on the known contaminated sites list. You need to hire an LSRP and, of course, follow the guidance document. If there's less than 200 cubic yards of contaminated soil anticipated, then there's no need to hire an LSRP. There's no need to notify the DEP or submit the LCP notification form. You can just go ahead and follow the guidance document. So I just mentioned this form. Fortunately, there's only two forms to fill out for a linear construction project. The notification form up front and the reporting form at the end. So if the 200 cubic yard of contaminated soil criteria is triggered and you want to follow the guidance, then at least 45 days prior to initiating construction, you need to submit the form for when contamination is known or suspected. The other time you need to submit this form is if you're undertaking the project, you didn't think you would encounter any contamination, but you do, then you have to submit it 45 days after you discover that contamination on the project. Now, what if you identify a discharge that was not expected? You did your due diligence, you did your pre-construction sampling, you're underway with your construction, whether it be boxing out for a roadway or putting in a utility pipeline, and you encounter a discharge that was not expected. Well, of course, it's not already known to the DEP, but they want to know about it, so you have to call the hotline. You also have to notify the property owner of the discharge in writing. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of oohs and ahs about having to notify the property owner. This is where the lawyers will get involved from the LCE and the property owner, but rest assured the DEP said that if they do get notified, then they will follow up with the property owner with respect to their affirmative obligation to remediate. And then you would need to include a copy of that notification to the DEP in your final report and final report form. Other conditions requiring a hotline notification, these are fairly obvious, I think. Environmental emergency after you call 911. When there's an immediate environmental concern condition and the discovery of any unknown regulated USTs or leaking unregulated USTs. And just while we're on that, just to expand upon the UST issue a little bit, I know it's covered in the guidance, and also Tessie touched on this. Many linear construction entities, just for the sake of not wanting to disrupt the schedule, will decide to remove the tank or tanks. If they do and there's a discharge, then as per the last slide on Tessie's presentation, that would kick you into the LSRP program, and you would have to undertake the delineation and remediation according to the ARCs and the tech rules. Now we come to what the guidance document is really all about, and how you manage this contaminated soil that comes out of the excavations or that you may encounter during the roadway improvement project or the railway construction project. And there's several options and several scenarios covered in the guidance document. Obviously, a lot of these are going to involve excavation of the contaminated soil. So you need to have to get a soil management plan or materials management plan together. It may include, and I'm sure a lot of them do this, the stockpiling of the soil on the site, particularly if you're looking at reusing or disposal. One of the benefits of the guidance document is that if you do encounter contaminated soil in your excavation, you're able to return that immediately to the excavation as backfill. I think that's a big benefit. Essentially, you could envision a pipeline contractor excavating a trench, a linear trench, material that comes out of the trench, provided it doesn't have gross contamination, no free or residual product, or is not a hazardous waste, could go straight back in the trench behind as soon as the pipe is laid. With soil reuse, you're able to reuse soil on the site as well. You can also use it off-site, but if you're going to use it on the site, you have to follow the relevant guidance, the alternative and clean fill guidance document. Essentially, it's that like-on-like concept where you can put it back provided it meets the 75 percentile test. Any soil that's reused or placed back into the excavation must be capped. It can be capped with 6 inches of material, whether that be clean fill or whether it be asphalt or pavement or whatever. But it must be capped. And the guidance also addresses the underground storage tank issue. Going back to the diagram, you ready, Joe? Thank you. In this particular example, remember I mentioned that excess soil was generated from this bypass link road here. That can be stockpiled for either on-site reuse or disposal, provided you're following the guidance document. Historic fill from this area, and I'll cover this in a minute, could be reused to help raise the grade, provided it's used within the limits of the linear construction project. And any other contaminated soil may be reused as well, provided it is capped. That could be capped even around the approaches and the embankments for the bridges, behind retaining walls and behind the pavements, or elsewhere on the project to raise the grades. With respect to historic fill, many of projects in New Jersey go through urban areas or areas in low-lying portions of the state where we know there's historic fill. And so this got a lot of discussion in the committee. How do we deal with historic fill? What sort of notifications are required, et cetera, et cetera. Historic fill, there's no need to no need to call the hotline. Historic fill may be reused in other areas with historic fill with a cap. Again, it's that like-on-like situation. Don't make it worse. You can reuse it if you wish. If it's not reused, it must be disposed of off-site, as per normal off-site disposal guidance. A groundwater investigation is not required to assess impacts from historic fill. I think that's really important, that everyone needs to understand that you can go ahead and you can manage historic fill on the project. You don't need to worry about groundwater impacts from historic fill. So you get to the end of your project. It could be a few months, it could be a few years, it could be many years. You're required to submit a final report. An LCP, and accompany it with an LCP final report notification form to the DEP within 180 days of the completion of the project. So if your project's been undertaken over 5 or 7 years, it's got various phases, you can leave your reporting to the very end. You have 180 days to submit it, and it can capture all components of the project in that one report. You don't need to, an LSRP doesn't need to issue an RAO for that project unless, and here's the exception, and again Tessie touched on this, unless the LCE decides for either business reasons or for scheduling reasons or for contractual reasons to remediate a particular parcel or portion of the parcel, and therefore they assume the role of a responsible party and want to get an RAO for that particular area. So if an LCE wants to have an RAO for a part or all of the project, then they would have to follow the ARC and the TEC rules, have the LSRP undertake the delineation and remediation according to those rules, and then at the end of the day submit an RAO for that particular part or all of the project. And I think that's it. If we have any questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Jeff. Please join me in just thanking Jeff and Tessie for the presentations. And now we have the ability for some questions, and afterwards there will be a break before the next presentation. So, questions? Dick has been waiting. Go ahead.
I have one question in 17 parts.
Only if you ask one at a time.
I can
Okay.
probably handle that part. Right, the breakout between the 200 cubic yards versus less than, and as far as reporting, from what I've seen of linear construction projects, I've only been involved in two, but there's not samples taken every 50 feet. I mean, running through a city where they're putting in a new sewer for 3 blocks and there's 120 houses on both sides of the street, that level of delineation or even the research is pretty much beyond what the municipal authority is going to want to do. How do you make a guesstimate that, you know, some mild contamination that you found parallel to one property is going to be 200 cubic yards or less?
That requirement, that limit was put in there for those kinds of projects, for when they're going into the road, they're maintaining a line or fixing a broken water main or whatever. So they're not required to come in. It's going to be the larger projects that have to come in, that have they have to account for, they have to plan for the number of trucks they need, the soil. These are engineers. They know what they're doing, right? I'm married to one, and he says he knows what he's doing all the time. So I said that's part of the planning process. That's part of the planning process, and that's the best I can tell you. These little projects that you see in the middle of the road, I would think that the vast majority of them are just going to go about doing their business. If they come into contact with free product flowing into the excavation, they're probably going to call 911. They're going to do what they have to do to deal with that, because they can't work in that kind of scenario. So, but in a general matter, of course, it's the bigger projects that have to come in, and kind of follow the guidance the way we laid it out.
Right. So we start out with a project where one of the samples shows some minor oil contamination, likely coming from a homeowner tank. We notify the homeowner as required and go about our business. And then when we start the actual dig, it's not that homeowner, it's one 50 feet down, and there is substantial contamination, not free product pouring in, but clearly we're going to go over 200 cubic yards. Do we then have to stop work for that 30-day notice? Or
No. It was
a
180 days after you find it. Let's say you have a yes. After you have
Or 45.
If
45 days.
It said 45.
I mean 45. Right. That's right. You're right. If you're doing a project, you're not anticipating anything, you're going along your merry way, and you run into contamination that you didn't anticipate, so you're going to call the hotline, right? And then you have 45 days to submit the notification form to hire LSRP, submit the notification form that you have contamination in that part of the project.
But without an LSRP on hand at the time, how do you continue with the project?
Well, you're going to hire one. So, I mean, do people run into this? Well, do you want to answer something?
Yeah, I'd like to take a step back and look at it a little bit bigger. Obviously, the bigger the project, the more likelihood you're going to have a consultant on board from day one. No one's asking the LCE to pin down the 200 cubic yard to the last cubic yard. I mean, you've got to make your best judgment when you're doing your planning as to whether or not you think you're going to trigger the 200 cubic yard. If you don't, you go out and do the work. If you do happen to encounter contamination where there's more than 200 cubic yards, yes, you're going to have to get an LSRP on board.
Okay, do you have to stop work at that point?
That's up to the LCE. If they can move to another area, continue working, that's fine. But they will have to stop work for that particular area where the contamination is.
Good luck with that one.
Again, the guidance is, no one's pretending that the guidance is a perfect guidance document, and I'm sure there's going to be case-by-case scenarios that you all have with your own linear construction entity that aren't addressed, because every part of any urban area has its own constraints, its own issues. What we've tried to do here is come up with a document that provides flexibility for linear construction entities, that eliminates the need for every little project to be in the program. If you're less than 200 cubic yards, or you think you're going to be less than 200 cubic yards of contaminated soil, you're not in. You don't need to be in.
All right, we're going to take questions from other. We'll come back, I swear.
As long as I get the microphone, just one more question. Since the LCE is not going to be responsible for the imposition of engineering and institutional controls, who is going to do that and maintain it in order for public health and safety to be protected?
It would be the responsible party, the property owner and the responsible party, like any other.
If it's historic
Case.
fill under a roadway that presumably is a city?
Then if there isn't, if you don't identify a responsible party for historic fill, you're not going to, that roadway and in and of itself, there's controls over access to those kinds of areas, so there wouldn't be probably not a permit and biennial.
Just building on that again, if the linear construction entity wants to take responsibility for the cleanup and they want an REO, then they would be responsible for the institutional engineering controls. If they do not want to do that and they're not the responsible party, again, you have to think of responsible and not responsible. If they're not the responsible party, they do not have an obligation to implement or maintain the engineering and institutional controls on any contaminated soil or historic fill.
But as the LSRP on the job,
Get it away from him. Come on, take it.
No. This is important. I
It
mean,
is.
my highest priority is protection of human health and
Yes,
safety in the environment.
yes.
I know this historic fill.
Yes,
Despite my personal feelings on the whole subject,
right,
I'm required to deal with that.
right.
Who's
So you're going to
who's
cap
put
it
a
with,
deed
you're going
notice
to
on?
cap, you're going to cap the road, you're going to put a roadway, you're going to put 6 inches of clean fill. Access to that area is not a high worry, not a high concern for the department.
Neither is it under the parking lot of one of my clients. But
I
he has
told you to
have a
get
deed
that
notice.
microphone away from him. Thank you. All right, we can go on. At 1 o'clock this afternoon, he'll see us at 1. And so, oh, now no one else is going to come. So let's take some other questions.
Question regarding, you had stated earlier, a lot of these linear construction projects take years to complete. If you have an ongoing project that was started under traditional case management and that project hasn't been closed out and NFA hasn't been issued, and presumably in May that would have to go under an LSRP, can that project, rather than opting into the traditional LSRP program, be allowed to opt into linear construction guidance?
Yeah, those projects in Kirsten Point and Han's shop, they're going to be given a special code to identify them, and then it's assumed, I guess we're going to write them letters and say, follow the guidance, hire an LSRP and follow the guidance.
Yeah, because we have case managers now that are calling us, telling us you need to complete these additional steps by such and such a date or
That's-
opt in. So they're apparently not aware of this.
Well, I think it's just a little variation on the theme. A lot of cases are in-house with all the documents and ready for an NFA, and the case managers are putting, some of them are able to put some energy into closing what they can right now. But in general, well, the linear construction guidance just came out, so we're going to make sure the staff knows this as well. They're going to be, those existing linear construction cases will get a special designation, and they're to hire an LSRP and follow the guidance.
Just going to take a quick question from the web, because the first one actually applies to all of our guidance documents. It's what about A2464, just passed by the legislature, and I believe that is the one about guidance. And the issue, I think, is that we think we're okay with that as far as this particular guidance for a couple reasons. We followed the stakeholder process. In addition to that, we also are not enforcing the guidance. But the department has not come out with a definitive statement on that. When we do, we will probably issue that either through a listserv message or somehow notify the regulated community. Also wanted to, the second one, repeat the questions for the webinar attendees. If you don't hear it, we are trying to get around the room with 2 microphones. We're doing the best job we can, so hopefully you will be able to hear that so we don't have to repeat the questions. We'll take another question from the audience. Got one in the back there, and we are running the microphone around. Great.
Okay, if a responsible, non-responsible party negotiated with a property owner to remediate contamination, say it's soil within a linear right-of-way, is he automatically responsible, therefore, to remediate the groundwater? It can be a soil remedial action only, and if he does have to remediate the groundwater, would he have to follow it outside the linear construction right-of-way?
Do you want to? No, neither of us want to answer that one. No, it would be between the responsible party and the person conducting the linear construction what they're signing up for. They can sign up for the whole thing, including groundwater, or they can say, we're going to handle the soil within our project, but you're going to have to handle groundwater outside of the linear construction zone. So it is really a site-by-site decision between the parties involved.
Tessie, can you, actually one of our web questions is related to that. Fourth one down, what about the proper management of dewatered groundwater? That's related to that as well.
Oh, dewatering, the linear construction entities or whoever's conducting these projects, if they're going to discharge to groundwater or to surface water, they have to get a discharge permit like anyone else.
So that is outside the realm of the linear construction guidance.
Yeah, we mentioned that in the guidance document, and it's up to them when they get that permit where they're going to have the discharge, whether a lot of times construction, dewatering, if it's not contaminated, they get that kind of permit, and if it is contaminated, they come to Variances group, the groundwater group in SRP, to get those discharge to groundwater permits, and that's basically unchanged by this document.
Okay, another one from the audience. I got it.
Hi, the level of due diligence, I gather, is going to be pretty much left up to the linear construction entity. Is that accurate? In other words, the department's not going to be second-guessing
That's correct.
the due diligence? Because I would think that it may vary considerably depending upon the nature of the project. For example, if you're doing a overhead utility line where the only excavations are going to be for the poles, but yet those poles may be widely separated, and the project may extend over many, many miles, you may not do the level of due diligence that you would for, say, an historic fill area where that's fairly confined, where you need to be maybe looking closer.
That's correct. And the guidance document was specifically written that way to give the linear construction entity as much ownership / flexibility during the planning and due diligence phase as they need to undertake their business assessment and risk management decisions. With respect to, say, a transmission line, I think you can envision the scenario where the utility company may want to implement the installation of that line in phases. I think it would then be up to the the utility company to decide whether each phase, particularly if there's a break in the duration, whether each phase becomes its own LCP. I mean, there is some flexibility in the guidance document to address that. A 50-mile long transmission line doesn't necessarily need to be one continuous linear construction project, particularly if it's broken up into 3 or 4 stages, each stage constructed at different intervals. Then each of those stages could be its own LCP as well.
Okay, right. Well, although I can envision the situation where you may want to actually be covered by the guidance and be able to submit the forms to the department. I think although you're not going to get an RAO unless you're an RP, I think there is some degree of comfort that when you're submitting documents to the department that you're at least have documented that you're following the guidance for any future issues that may come up. So
Right.
I could see that going both ways. One other question I had, picking up on something that Dick mentioned, on the institutional controls and also the public notification that the LCE doesn't have to comply with, but the RP does. Would the RP's obligations to record a deed notice and give public notification be automatically triggered by an LCE project? In other words, the LCE goes out and does work, puts on a cap. Does that mean that the RP has to, while they're doing this, give the public notice, and when the cap is completed, actually record the deed notice?
I think that's a fine line to, a call to make. If the linear construction entity is putting in the roadway, they put in their roadway, I don't think that needs to trigger the need to conduct public notice. But if they identify, they say, the responsible party, that contaminated site that's adjacent, now we're going to call, we're going to hire an LSP, we're going to go about doing a remediation from soup to nuts, but we know that part that is covered by the linear construction project is capped. They're going to go about their remediation, and when they trigger the RI for that work, I would think that the public notification could occur then. Okay, what I would like to do, we'll take one more question, and then we're going to remind you that at 1 o'clock across the street at 501, it's the building that Green Acres and Natural Resources are in. We're going to be on the second floor. It's called the Hudson Room. It's a conference room. Kirsten is going to be online with us then, or on a conference call, so we could come there. And if I see members of our committee are here, if you guys would like to come and help us out with that, that is open to you. But we'll take one more call. Not call. I think I'm on radio or something. One more call. Yes, listeners.
I just wanted to clarify the soil reuse and following the fill guidance. If you're putting the excavated soil right back in the same spot, you don't need to follow that.
Correct.
That guidance says that often, like historic fill, you're in a historic fill area, reusing historic fill, it's on like contamination. It meets all the criteria for like contaminants and concentrations. So that's why that would work. You can reuse within those areas.
But if you move it within the...
If you move it somewhere else, it's you have to follow the guidance, the concepts of like on like and the 75, because we don't want you generating contaminated sites elsewhere. Okay, so 1 o'clock, come and see us. Maybe we'll have cookies or something, I don't know. I'll have the leftover donut holes, but thank you.
Okay, and just for the webinar audience, I see that there are additional questions we didn't get to. Just be advised that we will take those questions, get answers from the instructors, and we will send those responses back to you. So we're going to take a 10-minute break. Please be back here at 25 of, and we will start the second part of the program. Thank you very much.
When you're talking, it makes it sound very I was doing yeah.
That was very good mousing over the laser point.
It's lots of skill for that, man.
Okay, we're going to get started again. If everyone could kindly take their seats. Okay, the next presentation we have is the conceptual site model training. We have 4 presenters, Nick DeRose, Rob Lux, Kim McAvoy, and Bill Gattabrio. And I will introduce Nick shortly, but I did want to just make a quick note. And this is from the people who have to make copies for these programs. It certainly helps us if you register, pre-register for the programs and give us enough time to make enough copies. We just circulated a copy that's going to be used in the next presentation. It's a full-color copy of a conceptual site model. One of the problems was we may not have enough copies. Just want to make the note, when you pre-register for these classes, it really helps us to plan and to make sure that we do have enough copies, and we're a little bit short. So that means a few people did not register. But just wanted to ask in the future, that would certainly help us if you did. So next up, I would like to introduce Nick DeRose of Langen to start the conceptual site model training. And these guys have worked very hard on this, and I think it applies to so many things. I just think this is an excellent presentation. So Nick.
Good morning. Thank you, George. And I am Nick DeRose of Langen. I've been very active and was president of the LSRPA. LSRPA was very glad to have the conceptual site model put on the list of guidance documents to be developed. Do I click? All right, let's just get me set up here.
That's backward, forward, and that's the pointer.
Thank you. All right, so the shown here is our guidance committee, and we had full representation of not only the department, LSRPs through the LSRPAs who were involved, and we also had industry represented as well. So we had good representation of different stakeholders through this process. I'm going to give you an overview, a discussion of the overview and purpose of the CSM guidance. This next slide describes the overall presentation that committee members will present. This is an outline of the overall presentation that committee members will give this morning. Again, in the overview portion of this, I will cover what is a CSM, key components of a conceptual site model, stressing, describing contamination, releases, and associated with AOCs or sites being made up of source, pathway, and receptors. Rob Lux will cover development of CSM, and then we'll have plenty of examples of application of the CSM. Kim and Bill will present that. Okay. Well, first of all, each of these slides that I'm presenting, you'll see in parentheses next to the title a number, in this case 2.0. So I'm really just referring to the section of the guidance document that corresponds to the topic that I'm presenting. An important point that came up early on in the development of the guidance was a question, is the CSM going to be required as a submission or as a form, as another form? And the answer is no. The CSM is guidance that can be used as a tool in concert with other DEP guidance and applicable regulations, ultimately to support remedial decisions and issuance of a response action outcome. So I'm going to expand on what this means a bit. As I said, it's a tool, so not required as submittal or a form. I think what was important from my perspective in having the CSM made available as guidance document is you'll notice, for example, George referred to the guidance on how to apply for variance or to apply guidance, and the basis for both getting a variance from tech regs and to use guidance other than DEP's guidance is providing some scientific or technical basis. And you go right back to Sarah. We have to provide scientific or technical basis for the work we do when we're exercising professional judgment. And that's really what this guidance does. So examples of how you can apply the CSM are when you're in the delineation phase, when you're working with the receptor evaluation. Again, there are several technical guidance documents that refer to applying the CSM to support examples of include LNAPL characterization, vapor intrusion, IEC, and another really important application of the CSM can be if you're dealing with a commingled plume. So the CSM really is a tool to support the LSRP in the professional judgment aspect of the work we do. Purpose of the CSM guidance is to talk about how we want to characterize a site and provide language and components that we should be thinking of. And in particular, we're focused on contamination sources, pathways from those sources, and the potential impact to receptors or receptors that can be impacted. So the CSM provides a framework to present the site environmental system and risk to human health and the environment when you think of a contamination release in this framework. Aids and documents decisions throughout the remedial process. Again, as I said, it supports making technically and scientifically defensible decisions. Finally, it communicates critical issues and or processes to interested parties. And there was a lot of interest in that concept. I think Assistant Commissioner Sweeney particularly spoke about that as seeing the CSM as a useful tool to support and how we inform the public of the work we do on these sites. The CSM, the New Jersey DEP guidance, draws upon existing guidance that is out there and has been established and used for a number of years, including from ASTM, ITRC, and there are federal agencies also that promote the use of the CSM. The important aspect of New Jersey's CSM guidance is really talks about how you can apply it within the state's regulatory framework. And again, when you look at other guidance that New Jersey has, you see how it can be used to support that guidance. The definition of the CSM from the guidance documents presented here. CSM is a written and or illustrated representation of the physical, chemical, biological processes that control, transport, migration, and potential impacts to receptors. So it's a lot more than saying we're going to just collect data and connect the dots. And I had the thought that the CSM is sort of like describing a contamination event the way you might describe a car accident. If you're driving down the highway and you see a car accident, you don't go home and tell whomever that, you know, I drove down the road and I saw one car over here, another car over here, a little oil over here. How about that, right? Now you go, look like the guy turned left, you know, off the highway in front of this other car. Can you believe he did that? So that is the way we should be thinking of how we're describing our work today in characterizing sites. Really not just soil data or groundwater data collected here or there, but what does it mean with respect to sources, pathways, and receptors. Do that work, we provide a scientific and technical basis to support decisions we'll make. So I'm going to talk about this briefly, expand on this. What is a CSM really? Again, description of sources, pathways, and receptors, tool for remedial decision making. Also, I want to emphasize that it supports an iterative process in how we characterize sites and how we make decisions through the remedial process. And it is a written or pictorial description. So I'm going to end up just highlighting these few points a bit further. As far as the key components of the CSM, again, description of sources, pathways, and receptors. So hopefully everyone is familiar with those terms, but on the other hand, when you look at the past history of the tech regs and prescriptive approach, we didn't necessarily do our work with that framework in mind. And again, you don't have to always present your work in terms of a CSM, but for more complex sites, it's very helpful to do that. So you're talking about contaminants and concentrations in media, the extent and potential for migration of the contaminants of concern, evaluating potential for COCs to impact receptors and assess exposure risks. And while we're doing this, we may also find there are incomplete pathways where contaminants can be clearly shown not to pose a risk to a receptor, groundwater or direct contact. Continuing, expanding on this a little bit, in terms of describing the contaminant impacts in the impacted media, should include all media, groundwater, surface water, soil, sediment, air, and there may be certain media where there are no contaminants found, and so you would summarize that. And there are graphics presented in the CSM guidance that sort of show how one can summarize how we would describe the extent of contaminants with respect to each media. And then you know what to focus on. Again, the iterative aspect of how one applies the CSM is emphasized here. In making remedial decisions, we evaluate the CSM throughout the life of a project. We identify and address data gaps. This is an important step in this iterative process. I've got information on a source, I have information on a receptor, but I don't know how it might get from my source to the receptor. I need to focus on my data gap is understanding what potential migration pathways need to be better characterized. The other aspect of considering this iterative nature of how one develops a CSM is for larger sites where you have an ongoing process where you're doing your receptor evaluation, you complete that form in your initial phase, and you may, if you're working with the CSM, have a CSM that's at one point, and then you're required later to update your receptor evaluation, and at the same time you could use a CSM to support that work. Again, all optional. Finally, as far as the form of the model, diagram, text, maps, two-dimensional, three-dimensional figures, that's dictated by the complexity of the site or the AOC and the available data. This graphic should be refined throughout the process to support the remedy selection and even post-remedy. It is not a computer model. Conceptual site model, if you hear that and you're not familiar with it, we're not saying you're doing computer modeling. It's an illustration of contamination in terms of its components from source, pathway, through receptor. So finally, just end with a little illustration. If you look at this from left to right, you want to be able to understand your site in terms of being able to tell, the story of, here we have contamination on the left associated with drums. We've got the black scoop there from the drums. Right away, we have migration pathways that can occur through air, through the soil, laterally, maybe above a clay layer, or can seep down vertically to groundwater, again going from left to right, and you can see how those migration processes occur to understand how surface deposition might occur from airborne migration, lateral migration affecting a basement, and still deeper migration in groundwater making its way to a well. So if you just had that soil data collected by the drums and a sample from the groundwater well and just presented that a report without considering how that migration occurred, you're really not, well, let me put it in the positive. If you do make that interpretation and synthesize that understanding and interpretation of data, then you can begin to have a scientific and technical basis to support how you're going to complete your characterization remediation. So I'll end with that and pass this on to Rob Lux.
All right. Good morning. My name is Rob Lux, and I'm a geologist. I'm currently in the Bureau of Enforcement and Investigation. So what I'm going to do is just pick up where Nick left off and basically follow right through the guidance document that we have out there. So the following sections, we're going to describe the components that should be considered in the development and the presentation of the CSM. We want to make sure about the level of detail. Does it match the complexity of the site and the available data? The format and presentation of the CSM may also vary from a separate standalone document to something that's incorporated into the body of the submittal. And the process begins with, what are you trying to characterize? A single AOC, an entire site, or something larger? Once this is defined, you need to determine if you're going to use it to address human or ecological receptors, or both. You should include a site plan appropriate to the scale and the intent of the CSM. Should include the AOCs, the sources, and the contaminants of concern. We provide a checklist in Appendix A of our document. It identifies the type of information which could be collected during the investigation and the remedial process. So there are a number of types of information that should be considered: maps, photographs, utilities, and additional layers of information should be added as the case proceeds through the investigation and remediation process. A good source of information are plant personnel. You know, we had a site with leaking fuel oil tanks. Unfortunately, we also had high levels of TCE associated with the AOC. So based on a historical review of the site, there was no linkage between the TCE and the UST. So during a site inspection, we saw a small fill pipe in the vicinity of the day tank, and when we asked the plant personnel what it was, he said, oh, well, that's where we used to pour in the spent solvents into the day tank. So since the day tank leaked like a sieve, we kind of figured out where the VO contamination was coming from. Once you have the lay of the land, next step is to identify, characterize potential sources. We're going to generalize what, where, and when. The characterization should include the discussion of the type of the material, the location of discharge, age, duration if you know it, and an estimate of the volume. That will often change upward as we go along. You know, there may come a day when a security video shows the forklift spearing the 55-gallon drum. The drum's clearly marked, so you know exactly where it is. You know that it's all time-stamped. But we're not seeing that now. We're dealing with sites that you're going to have to do a lot more legwork with. So one important part of this discussion at this point is determining if the contamination is site-related or not. Off-site sources can include historic fill or DAP or impacts from neighboring sites. Determining this contribution from off-site sources is going to be important for each media that we discuss. The migration pathway sections, those are going to account for most of the change and growth of your conceptual site model as you go through this process. Each media, as we define and expand, is going to change. So for soil, we're going to start out with characterization of the nature and extent of that contamination. You're going to need to comply with 3.6 of the tech rules and follow the PA Soils Technical Guidance, the SIRIRA Soil Technical Guidance, and the Field Sampling Procedures Manual. Hopefully we'll have all those guidance documents out relatively soon. To characterize, we need to answer questions like, what is the contaminant? How far does it extend horizontally and vertically? What are its physical characteristics? What's its solubility, its density? And what characteristics are going to be important at your site? For instance, what are the heterogeneities in stratigraphy? Next, you should consider potential risks and migration pathways, such as the proximity to buildings, is there soil cover, preferential pathways along utilities, and that kind of information. And a good CSM is a great way to deal with the complex interactions between the contaminants and the environment. For groundwater, the approach we use is very similar to that we use for soil. We're just trying to get our arms around the basic questions determining the nature and extent of the contamination. You have to comply with 3.7 of the tech rules, and we're going to have the PISI-RI groundwater technical guidance out. We also have the field procedures manual. The CSM should address issues like, what is it? Is it BN? Is it metals, chlorinated? Is it a DNAPL or an LNAPL? Are you dealing with dissolved? Questions like, where is it? Is it in a class 1 or a class 2? Is it bedrock overburden? Is it both? Is it a small plume or one that has its own zip code? We have to figure out where it's going and what's controlling flow. Is it a 12-inch sand layer? Is it the strike of bedrock? Or is it the 2 million gallon a day guy pumping next door? And finally, we've got to look for, is there a background contribution? You know, there's a guy next door, this is the problem. If there's a need for specialized geologic or engineering expertise, you may have to get it at this point to help you with the characterization of the migration pathway. So this is just a cross-section. It's depending on how you read it, it could be a simple scenario where you have one common error that could invalidate your CSM is the installation of monitoring wells at a consistent predetermined depth without evaluating stratigraphy. For instance, if the wells are installed, but the well logs and the soil borings are not reviewed and put into a cross-section, then preferential pathways can be missed. As illustrated in this figure, if you're not accounting for the dipping transmissive zone that acts as a preferential pathway, it could lead the investigator to conclude that the groundwater contamination is delineated. In fact, contamination was simply missed due to inadequate site characterization. This problem could have been averted by checking the boring logs and creating a cross-section similar to the one above. You know, this is an example, though, that's particularly disturbing because if you look at this on map view, you see a simple plume, it's the source, you have a clean well, look, you've delineated, boy, that was quick, I'm in great shape. It's only when you look at the data, put it into context, that you realize that it's not quite as simple as we thought. Surface water. Once again, it's about knowing what you have, where it is, and in this case, what are the mechanisms in place that are controlling or exacerbating that impact. You're going to follow 3.8 of the tech rules, and as far as guidance, we have the Ecological Evaluation Technical Guidance document out. We're going to look for things like storm sewer backfill, stress vegetation or seeps, and we're going to look for, are there ongoing discharges or are there historical discharges that may be an issue? Is there the potential for groundwater to migrate and impact surface water? Just have a quick example here. You know, we had a site, and this example will try and tie more of the overall concept of the CSM together. We had a TCE free-phase discharge in a courtyard, and it was at the surface. It penetrated down. There was a clay layer at 18 to 20 feet, so we had a DNAPL pool on that top of that clay layer. We started delineation. The dissolved contamination, we saw a decreasing trend, both shallow and right at the top of the clay. Everything looked good. We weren't concerned about surface water because of the distance between those impacts that we had and where the surface water body was. But as we fine-tuned the delineation and tried to complete it, we started seeing data that didn't make sense and didn't fit in the context of what we had already delineated. We saw occasionally we would see a higher concentration in a shallow interval or a higher concentration in a deeper interval far away from where we had a clean sample previously. So the CSM at this point was telling us it didn't make sense. Something was wrong. We revisited that courtyard and investigated a storm sewer grate that was in there. Well, it turns out that the spill containment around the drum storage pad was not particularly effective. They apparently discharged into the storm sewer. So at that point we measured we took some soil samples at that grate. We took some soil samples where the storm sewer discharged, and that answered some of the questions about the data not making sense. Not all of them. Well, we had to go back and we looked through the storm sewer to see if there were any leaks. And everywhere there was a leak, we had additional NAPL. So all of a sudden, we had all these different additional discharges, and the conceptual site model really started to make sense at that point. So just to summarize, what we did was you took the CSM, we filled it in with data, we started to see data gaps, things that didn't make sense, we revisited the conceptual site model, and we investigated, we identified potential discharges, we characterized them, and then we established that a pathway did exist and remediated the contamination. For sediment, we're going to ask and try and answer the same questions. What are your contaminants concerns? How large is the area that's impacted? And where are those contaminants moving? And what's controlling that movement? You know, is it a pipe discharge? Is it groundwater upwelling? What controls the exposure pathways for human and or ecological receptors? Is there an off-site contribution? Requirements for sediment are found in 3.8b of the tech rules, and the guidance is, once again, the Ecological Evaluation Technical Guidance document. For vapor and air, same things. Do we have a condition that would trigger a vapor investigation? Do we have soil or groundwater or both contamination above trigger levels? Do we have proximity to the receptors? The situation we're encountering now are sites that previously had very high levels of groundwater contamination. However, current groundwater, not so bad. If the old data are not included in your evaluation, your CSM may miss contamination that's stored in the unsaturated zone. This contamination can result in a pathway to receptors due to matrix diffusion. So you really need to take that historical perspective when you're collecting data and inputting it into your conceptual site model. The conceptual site model should identify the risks and be used to justify the actions you take to mitigate those risks. Once mitigation is in place, it can be used to verify its effectiveness, and when you're documenting that effectiveness, and if it's not working, it's a perfect time to revisit the CSM and check your assumptions. Rule and guidance, it's the vapor intrusion material is found in 1.18 of the tech rule, and we're going to have a vapor intrusion technical guidance document that should be out soon. Actually, it might be out. So, this slide might look familiar to the people who have read the VIG, the old VIG. This we just put in as a very basic CSM. It's all generalized, but we feel it could be something that you could use to replace the general information that's shown with site-specific information. You know, it's the same questions again. Contaminants, do you have something in excess of soil triggers, groundwater triggers? Do you have a pathway? And what are the receptors? And what steps are taken to investigate or remediate? With vapor, I'd say more than anything, it's important to determine if there's off-site sources. You know, in some respects, there almost should be, you know, like paint jars or solvents located in the basement. We had someone who was very concerned, wanted to know when the indoor air sampling was going to occur because he wanted to make sure that he got the engine he was rebuilding out of his basement in time to collect the samples. So, you know, human and ecological receptors. What are the contaminants threatening human or ecological receptors? Have you evaluated them? What's the pathway for each contaminant? Are they different pathways for each contaminant? Are you talking about inhalation, dermal, bioaccumulation, potable wells? Are the pathways complete? Is there the potential for future the pathway for being complete in the future? You know, it's important to make this determination now so that you can be ready later. And finally, will you combine the human and ecological exposure into one document, or does it make more sense to keep them separate? We recommend that, you know, the CSM is a great way to help you fill out and make sure the information in your receptor evaluation is complete. They kind of work hand in hand. If the receptor evaluation is good, that's all important data to use in your conceptual site model. Okay. This slide is just a very simple potential pathway slide, and it shows everything is generalized. And I think this is a good thing to have around because I think it's basically a visual checklist. You know, you can kind of hold this in your head, look at it in the guidance document, and make sure that you've evaluated your site in the context of all these different receptors. So up until now, we've been assembling the pieces of the puzzle, you know, the source areas, the contaminants, and their extent. The next step is to piece together all the information you have and assemble it into the broader context of the surrounding area. You should clearly describe the site, the contaminants, the pathways, the receptors, such as potable wells or critical species. It may also include the discussion of the data gaps that you have or any uncertainties that you have in your conceptual site model. We recommend that you use a map at this point, and the figures should be updated as necessary. This is a great tool. I think this is the primary tool that I would use in having a discussion. If someone calls from the public about one of your sites, this generalized concept, kind of a map, is the best tool to use in that situation. Okay. The final piece for us is a narrative description. Now, for a simple case, it may just be include text boxes on a drawing with data or cross-sections. And it can range all the way up to, for a complex site, a CSM may warrant just an entire section in your report. In some cases, it may be standalone. The whole point is you want to have a conceptual site model that fits your site. For something that's not complicated, it shouldn't be a complicated conceptual site model. But you have to add it as you build through the process. All right. Well, I think that's it. We're going to have a short section for questions for Nick and I before we head on to the application section with Kim and Bill.
Yep. Thank you very much, Rob. Join me in thanking Rob and Nick for the presentations. Thank you guys very much. And we'll take a couple quick questions before we move on to the application of the CSM. Any questions in the audience? That's a good thing. Anything on the web, Joe? Is this all from LCE? Okay, so we don't have any for CSM on there? Okay, great. Again, if you guys do come up with any questions, please submit them and we'll make sure to get them answered. But at this point, I will introduce Kim McAvoy, and who's going to start off the second part of this training session. So, Kim.
Thank you. Let me just get situated here. Okay. I'm Kim McAvoy. I work for DEP in site assessment section, investigating unknown sources of contamination for the state. I'll be talking about how to apply the CSM. I'll go over some case studies, and then Bill will also go over case study. I want to point out before we start, there is a handout. Hopefully you guys received the color handout. If you haven't, please let us know. We can provide that with you later, but that's going to be part of this discussion. Okay, to point it this way. The CSM can really be applied through all phases of the remedial process, and that's what we feel is very important as a group. The CSM, I'd like to just reiterate what we talked about in the beginning of this talk. It is a tool that should be used to communicate complex or simple scenarios to your audience in a comprehensive, concise way. It should identify the relationship, and we keep saying it, we're going to keep saying it, between the source, the pathway, and the receptor. And as LSRPs, we really feel that you can incorporate the CSM in required submittals to help support your decision-making process, support your professional judgment. And that's really a great tool that you should use and take advantage of. So in our conceptual site model document, in the preliminary phase portion of your investigation, you can use the CSM to really summarize the information you know at that time. And regarding your AOC, your site, or your, whatever you've identified as the scope of your conceptual site model at that time, and support the basis for determining an approach further along the line in your site investigative phase. When you're performing a site investigation, you can incorporate the conceptual site model in this submittal. If you've done a conceptual site model in the PA phase of the investigation, you should update the CSM with site-specific information, ultimately characterizing physical, chemical, biological systems that might be affecting contamination and the migration of the contamination, describing those processes that control migration and may affect exposure to certain contaminants at your site. And really a great tool to identify what is not site-related, what you're really not going to be looking at, and you've characterized, with previous investigations, you've identified that there is potentially historic fill, or there is historic fill on your site. There's off-site plumes that you've already identified, and you're now presenting that information in the CSM and identifying background. And we did mention before about variances, and that was in the beginning of this whole session. And this is really a great tool that can be used to support the proposal for a variance. I'm going to go over, this is actually in Appendix C of the conceptual site model document. This is an example of a site showing a single AOC during a preliminary phase of the investigation. But I'm going to go through kind of some way of really what we look at as looking at pathway focused and going through this through your pathway evaluation at no matter what stage you are in the investigation. Usually you're going to see this just the schematic, but in the guidance you actually have a short narrative that accompanies this describing site history, that no IECs were identified for this site. Also the actions taken in a short summary, it's like 2 or 3 sentences, and also a short description of impacted media. But you also will see that we have used a graphic to concisely identify what we're looking at, what our concerns are in this phase. Right now, as you see, there is one AOC of stained soil in the narrative. It does say it's a 25 square feet of stained soil and gravel. At this time, in this phase, we actually see that a soil boring was installed and soil samples were collected, but there's no analytical results at this stage of the investigation. So right now, we really don't know what's going on in soil. So the pathway is unknown, and we've identified that. We also have identified where we have collected our soil samples and the analysis associated with this soil why or where we've collected the soil samples. Based upon PIDs, we have a soil sample collected at 5 feet, and we also have a shallow sample collected at 0 to 6 inches. Right now, we do not have any groundwater data. As I said, we only submitted for soil. And based upon, we're looking at the pathways and just going through the pathway thought process, air and surface